The present day. By the time enough of the dreary morning sunlight had penetrated the thin curtain covering a dirty window with hoar frosting on the inside, Archie Miller could just about make out the grey handles of his NHS wheelchair visible at the end of his divan bed. It stood there, waiting for him, and opening his ageing eyes, Archie looked at its torn cushions, worn tyres, its backrest which was already bulging outwards from supporting his weight over too many years. It looked a mess, and it was almost unfit for purpose. It was hardly ever serviced these days, the footrest pointed upwards like the spans of Tower Bridge, to make it easier for him to drag himself into a seated and at least mobile position. Archie regarded it with a mixture of humour and gratitude. Humour that, unlike the powered one he'd had before, they'd not yet taken this one away from him. Let them try, he raged inside. And gratitude that at least, after all those years of paying his stamps, soldier, man, and boy, he had at last the right to limited personal independence. Miller felt relieved as he lay in bed. The old red digit clock was still on. That meant his electricity had lasted through the night, even though he knew he was on emergency credit, and it was doubtful if he'd have enough to wash in the electric shower and cook breakfast on his one remaining hot plate on a cooker obtained from a charity shop. Archie had a decision to make, and as he'd had no hot food since last night, he chose to cook and use the microwave. He could wash later in his wheelchair with a bowl of soapy water and a flannel. He'd washed in his helmet in cold water from a water bowser in the army. They'd taught him to reuse washing water, to shave in a cracked mirror he recalled that used to hang from a thick jungle creeper. As his mind flashed back there, even for a second, Archie felt sweetness and pain returning together. Still in stark black and white, always in stop rather than slow motion, he saw the image of the young officer split in two by a shell fragment straight down the middle. On this replay, it seemed to Miller like both halves were in mirror image, but this time the stomach contents showed up stark in contrasting detail. Archie found himself dry heaving as he tried to reach the wheelchair. He flopped back onto his crumpled blankets, recalling the barracks before it happened, and he was ripped apart by other means. Even at that moment, he could not recall which of the many assaults on his senses was the one that broke his back and damaged his legs. That broken back did more to Archie than just cripple him for the rest of his then young life. He gave up trying to reach the wheelchair. He willed that his sweet chariot could swing as low as it wanted, but it would never contact him like the sweet-smelling body of the young woman with whom he had made the beast with two backs that night. That was the last time he had ever been able to get close and participate in such warmth and comfort. He remembered opening his wallet and smiling because the contraceptive wasn't there anymore. He remembered even exchanging currency for that carnal pleasure. And then he stopped remembering. Intense cold robbed him of his breath. He could see white vapour as he exhaled onto the still, cold covers. His mind struggled with other worries as he pulled the bedclothes over his thin, scarred and misshapen legs. He hated them even after all these years. To him, they were offensive, an insult to his dignity, a blow to what pride he had left. And they reinforced his sense of useless, unhappy dependence. At around 11 o'clock, Miller looked out of his front window. What little heat there had been in the sun had melted the thin wafer of ice, forming a pool of clear water on the windowsill. He knew any second now he'd hear the intercom buzz. Then he'd lift the entry phone and let her in. It was the same every morning. She would collect his mail before ascending the stairs and ringing his doorbell. He could normally anticipate from her ring and her footsteps on the tiled floor outside his heavy doorway when to unlock his multi-lock peephole door. He never bothered to check the peephole. It meant raising himself from his chair, and besides, he knew her footfalls as very well as her shoes tapped the tiles. She was small, light on her feet, smiling, and the moment she entered a cold room, she exuded a sense of enthusiasm and purpose. Although she was designated his carer, she'd become his friend. He trusted Mary, for that was her name, with the many intimacies of his life. Her visits brought with them company as well as routine and caregiving. Drifting into a daydream, Miller suddenly heard the buzzer from the interphone. In one swift and guided push from his withered right arm, he managed to pull himself close enough to answer its croaking sound. He heard the line click as he raised the headset to his good ear. In the background, he could make out the swirl of traffic on a main road. He knew he'd have to almost shout to make himself heard at the flashing panel outside the main entry door. "Come on up, Mary," he shouted loudly and distinctly into the headset, just as a bus went by and he could hear its rumble. "Okay," came the pitched voice at the other end, as Miller pushed the button, releasing the external door catch. When she reached Archie's room, Mary let herself in with the key he'd given her. "When are they going to fix that lift, Archie?" she asked, taking off her gloves and revealing her small, manicured hands. Archie thought how defiant she looked as she turned from closing the door to look him directly in his brown eyes. "It's like climbing Mount Everest without oxygen out there. I thought I was going to pass out." Mary paused for emphasis. "And I've given up smoking, as you know, Archie," she added almost as an afterthought. "With you in your chair, you're as good as trapped up here. If there was a fire, how would you get out?" The girl inflected up at the end of her question, leaving a gap that let Miller reply. "Well, they're supposed to have some sort of stretcher or chair on each floor, but I haven't seen one in ages now. Most of the tenants in here would be too frail to help themselves, let alone me or anybody else for that matter." Mary gave Archie a look of concern. Walking over to the sink, she began to tidy the breakfast things and run the water. The tap ran cold for such a long time, she wondered if the central hot water system for all of the small bedsits had failed again. Turning to Archie, the tap still running, she asked, "Hot water?" Her manicured hand darting in and out of the stream from the big, old-fashioned tap. "Not since Friday last week, apparently. But what can you do? Like when we were in the army, you've got to make the best of a bad lot. Archie, you're a veteran, and like all of your generation, you shouldn't just have to make do. What's this world coming to that you cannot even get constant hot water in this poky, dark bedsit? Did your lot fight a war to build a better world and rebuild everything after the Nazis and their bombs just for this?" "Oh, well." The small figure paused, reaching over to the work surface for the electric kettle. "I'll boil this up and we can have a brew as well." "Char and a wad," announced Miller jokingly. "You what?" asked Mary, filling the kettle, slowing the tap. "Char and a wad," Archie said, again, still grinning like a Cheshire cat. When Mary still looked at him puzzled, he explained, "Army language for tea and a bun." The smile suddenly left Miller's face. Mary shut off the tap and closed the kettle, setting the switch for it to boil. "First thing I remember, after waking up, after I damaged my legs, was that fat bloke in the bed opposite. He was sitting up and having char and a wad, while this nurse stared down at me in her QA uniform." It wasn't long before Mary had left, and Archie was once again sitting on his own, feeling trapped, useless, and unworthy in so many ways that it hurt inside.